Hello, sorry this review is so late. I had accommodation issues and then I caught COVID. All solved now. I can make videos again. Please forgive me. Enjoy. Cheers. Hello everyone. Remix Review Guy here. I review remixes. In this video we are doing a long overdue review of an even longer overdue remix album. A piece of unfinished business that has become the highest profile remix album of 2025, Veronica Electronica, by the one-time Queen of Pop herself, Madonna. If you're around my age, you will need no introduction to her work or her public persona whatsoever, and if you're significantly younger, I'll be honest, there's plenty of other videos that will give you a primer on Madonna way better than I can. What I'm going to focus on today is an aspect of her career that has long fascinated me, and that is credibility. Madonna's oeuvre may well have been taken to heart by the critical consensus by 2025, but on and off throughout her career, there has been a continuing fluctuation between Madonna, the disposable pop artist, and Madonna, the serious musical artist. And even in the 21st century era of unashamed poptimism, you can still hear critics uttering phrases like,
Madonna isn't Bjork and she's not Imogen Heap. She does not have the depth to pull that off.
It is safe to say that some of the experimental darlings of the 90s were kind of wary of Madonna. The aforementioned Bjork did write a song for Madonna, but reportedly was not especially enthusiastic about doing so.
You know, no offense to Madonna, but I was kind of more doing it as a present to my friend.
Electronica lone wolf Aphex Twin went even further, apparently telling her he'd only collaborate with her if she made pig noises instead of singing. Something which, had that happened, would probably not even be in the top 10 embarrassments in Madonna's career at this point. One serious artist who was comfortable working with Madonna, however, was 90s ambient electronica maestro William Orbit, and his extensive box of tricks afforded the pop icon a more serious, deeper level of clout in dance music circles, courtesy of her 1998 album Ray of Light, one of the most mature and ethereal full-lengths in Madonna's catalogue, and the album that brought her back into the realm of being ahead of the pop curve, rather than the slightly more zeitgeist vibes of her previous albums. Simultaneously, around this time, big room club music was starting to diverge, with the emergence of a more studious underground genre called progressive house, which developed in opposition to the cheap frills of the goofy rave and pop-tastic disposability of much mainstream dance music at the time. And Madonna managed to bag herself a few slices of that cred by bringing in a bunch of respected club producers to give her latest batch of tracks some timely overhauls for the dance floor. 27 years later, several of those statements have been unearthed, abridged and slung together into a full-length remix album, Veronica Electronica, a collection initially meant to be released at the time but was apparently shelved due to the ongoing popularity of Ray of Light. Now in 2025, off the back of a sustained campaign of Madonna remix re-releases from Warner, it's finally here. But is it too late? Certainly the critical consensus has been somewhat lukewarm for this release, and William Orbit himself struggled to get past even the second track on this remix release. Is this a somewhat misguided, abrupt and out of context release in the Madonna catalogue? Or have these reworks actually stood the test of time better than many would think? Well, let's try and shine a ray of light on this issue. So, fun fact, my first ever favourite artist was Madonna. Yeah, genuinely. My mum had her greatest hits album, The Immaculate Collection, on cassette, and played it in car journeys so often I ended up remembering every little harmony, every little drum fill, every odd little lyric. So when my mum bought her 1992 album Erotica, I was like, yeah, I like this. I want this played at my birthday party. I'll be honest, I didn't really understand what the album was about, nor did I know about the coffee table literature she was releasing in order to promote that album. All I remember is at school the following day one kid said, "Your party was crap, by the way," and I never heard Madonna quite the same way again. Plus also in 1995 I discovered dance music, and that was that. Obviously, a lot of Madonna's biggest hits were danceable. Some of them even explicitly talked about dancing. But they didn't have that cozy alignment of those dance beats and noises in those club tracks that I was into. And so once we got to the spectacle that was Madonna's 1998 album Ray of Light, I was kinda done with her. That said, I do remember quite enjoying her first single, Frozen. A moody, breathy ambient breaks track and effectively a hymn to the emotionally distant. On the face of it, this is a somewhat downbeat, melancholic introduction to an album cycle, but in the context of Madonna's narrative, it kinda makes sense. Madonna's previous album, Bedtime Stories, was mostly a bunch of R&B and hip-hop productions that sounded like she was trying to score some second-hand G-Funk and Janet Jackson points. But there is one curveball towards the end of the track list. The unpluralized title track, Bedtime Story. The one she got Bjork in to write for her and Bjork collaborator Nelly Hooper to produce. And this ambient techno motif is the one song on the album that explicitly paves the way sonically for Ray of Light. There are minor pre-echoes elsewhere on Bedtime Stories as well, such as those Enya-style harmonies on Secret. But Frozen is the first track that really matches up a different emotional palette for Madonna. The melancholy of her low-key ballads combined with the rave-influenced futurism of Bedtime Story. Now, if we look at Madonna's co-producer for the Ray of Light album, William Orbit, we can definitely see a figure primed for expanding upon this sound. A predominantly electronic wizard who started in the late 80s, making albums under the title Strange Cargo. His most well-known solo track from the early 90s is Water from a Vine Leaf, featuring folk singer and future Chemical Brothers collaborator Beth Orton on vocals. This era of his production fits fairly neatly into the early volley of chill-out vibes from the rave quarters, the Orb, the KLF, etc., but also leaning slightly towards the more new age side of things like Enigma. And so Frozen is effectively a gentle thawing of the Orbit Madonna universe. But the big glow at the end of this tunnel was the second single, the title track Ray of Light. Let's talk about one major facet of this song which is often glossed over, which is that this is actually a cover. The original is an intimate early 70s folk track by the duo Curtis Muldoon titled Sephirin.
In the sky at night, I wonder.
It's a song about God, spiritualism, the earth and the universe. Big, weighty, expansive concepts, accompanied only by an acoustic guitar.
And I feel like I've just got home.
A lot of folk music does work with that kind of contrast, but in their version, Madonna and Orbit have tried to make the music as big as the subject matter. And to date, this one still sounds really unique in Madonna's catalogue. For starters, her singing is in another realm on this song, effectively bellowing at the top of her range. Orbit apparently pitched the track up a semitone from its original key to try and force her to push the vocals further than she ever had before. Then there's the actual music, and the 90s were a playground for artists who wanted to bring rock and dance music together into a seamless whole. Most of them took a fairly similar route, mixing breakbeats and acid house 303s with punk attitude and grunge guitar. Ray of Light brings those elements together in a much more unique fashion. The guitar at the beginning almost feels like something out of a Sheryl Crow record, whilst those towering walls of synth throughout feel more indebted to shoegaze bands like My Bloody Valentine. And the beat hits on this very unusual middle ground. Too obviously electronic to be a rock stomp, but almost too diegetic to be a dance beat. It feels like it's just organically part of the package rather than being grafted on deliberately to make the song club friendly. Even with the lead up of Frozen, this one comes out of nowhere in Madonna's oeuvre, and it's kind of a left turn for William Orbit as well. Outside of his own work, his only previous production jobs had been for modern folk artists like Caroline Lavelle and the aforementioned Beth Orton. But this kind of upbeat, high-octane stuff wasn't really his thing. Where did this come from? Well, as far as 90s music culture goes, I think you could also trace this one back to Bjork. I've discussed before how her mid-90s work often utilised the affect and aesthetic of dance music, whilst demonstrating very little intent to make the listener dance, at least not in any club environment.
I go through all this before you.
Instead, such fast-paced beats end up being a world-building tool, a stylistic choice that helps tell the story of the song. You can hear that on Ray of Light for sure, but I feel like this ideology permeates several of the tracks on the album as well, such as Skin and Sky Fit Heaven. Skin in particular gives me those Bjork vibes, not just from the frenetic hyper ballad style techno beat.
Do I know you from somewhere?
But the lyrics about an affinity to someone you haven't necessarily known that well reminds me of the songwriting on I Miss You.
I miss you.
Maybe not quite as subtle though. That said, the journey and the layering on Skin is much more elaborate than those two tracks. You've got these aquatic chords of 90s trance, this skating breakbeat, and this lovely sparingly used burst of distorted guitar cutting through the atmosphere like an epiphany. And then 2 tracks later on the album, Sky Fits Heaven rides a similar up-tempo 4/4 beat and breaks combination, once again operating more as a pulse than a groove. On this one, the emphasis is more on melody, with some broad strings and pianos that have more than the whiff of Italian producer Robert Miles. The lyrics here are a combination of 2 themes that are writ large across this entire album, that being Madonna's spiritual interests in Kabbalah and Hinduism, and the birth of her first child, Lourdes. And the opening track on the album, Drowned World Substitute for Love, sets the ball rolling for that particular theme.
The face of you, my substitute for love.
The song explores the burning question in Madonna's life: would she rather have fame or family? And in this particular song, she concludes family.
I traded fame for love without a second thought.
Which is why the vibe here is one of lucid, cosy optimism that might emerge from a brain fog. You can also see that narrative unfold in this not particularly subtle music video as well, depicting her running away from hordes of paparazzi before escaping from them by hugging a small child. It's the start of a series of critiques of fame that culminate in the somewhat tone-deaf American life. But at this stage in her career, it at least sounds like someone more working out what they want in real time, which is a process that it's never too late to undergo. Ray of Light had 5 single releases in total because it was the 90s, why wouldn't there be? And the remaining 2 mark the more underwhelming end of the album for me. You've got mid-tempo house number Nothing Really Matters, where Madonna parrots the notion that living child-free is somehow selfish.
Nothing really mattered to me but making myself happy.
Which maybe you could make grounds for making sense in the 90s, but in 2025 it sounds like a eugenicist coat of arms. Mostly though, this one musically, despite some plucky elements like the wandering piano. Overall, I find it quite plain, and there's also that warbling melody in the second half that I've never been able to enjoy after it cropped up in that dreadful American Pie cover. Shudder. At the time though, all my family talked about with this song was Madonna's jerky dancing in the video. I'm actually fine with awkward dancing when it's with music that I really like, but when it comes with a song that I find kind of milquetoast, I'm like, trying too hard. I'm also not a big fan of the final single, The Power of Goodbye.
There's nothing left to lose.
A low-key breakup ballad that is once again musically fine, but it feels somewhat stock in comparison. At the very least, I like the title premise. That notion of the power of goodbye, like it's some kind of superhero trait.
Wind, water. Goodbye. Go planet.
Yeah, that does capture my imagination somewhat. When it comes to the remaining album tracks, we've got Swim and Candy Perfume Girl, both of which are kind of easy listening presentations of indie dance. And both of which feel like pre-echoes for Don't Tell Me from her follow-up album Music. Both of them are fine, but the vibes do explicitly feel like Water from a Vine Leaf meets Loveless to me. For me, the most interesting album tracks arrive in the second half of the album, starting with Shanti Ashtangi. The most explicit acknowledgement of Madonna's spiritual turn on this album, given that the lyrics are a Hindu Sanskrit prayer. And then the final trio of songs on this album are pretty much a stylistic free-for-all, especially since this section starts with To Have and Not to Hold. Stylistically, perhaps the most unexpected track on this album, and yet somehow it's an utterly fitting detour into melancholic bossa nova. The contrast between the usually fairly jaunty and upbeat genre with this pallid mood with Enya-esque harmonies is absolutely sublime, and if not quite my favourite song from Ray of Light, it's definitely my favourite album track. Then you have a complete mood shift in Little Star, which technically was released as a single, as a double A-side with The Power of Goodbye, and this one goes for soothing lullaby drum and bass.
Never forget where you come from love.
It's another song for her daughter, and as such this one's a little too saccharine for me, but gotta say those double bass and string arrangements are top notch. And then to close out, Mergirl, a beatless account of a dream that she once had about her mother's death.
I ran to the forest, I ran to the trees.
And whilst it might not be the most overtly soul-bearing thing you'll ever hear from Madonna, it does feel like an ending that properly pulls you into her mind for a bit. So that's Ray of Light, effectively the first ever Madonna album I have listened to from start to finish in my adult life under my own steam, and colour me impressed. This is certainly a Madonna album I was in the wrong headspace to understand and enjoy at the time that it came out, because it deals with a lot of themes that I wouldn't have been interested in at the age of 13. Spiritualism, heartbreak, motherhood. Admittedly, I'm not that interested in several of these concepts now, but the production and vibe of this record is so pristine that, for the most part, it doesn't bother me. What impresses me, though, is that Ray of Light is an album that genuinely feels out of time in 1998. Like, it's grounded in the ambient side of rave and hip-hop from the early 90s, but it doesn't feel like it was behind the curve. Nor does it really feel like the pop zeitgeist of 1998, which was actually a lot closer to what she'd done on Bedtime Story. And in terms of predicting the future, well, it doesn't feel like it was part of any obvious aesthetic shift in the pop that followed in the ensuing decade. Orbit did go on to produce other pop artists, and some of his familiar sonic trademarks did crop up in their work, most notably All Saints. And more recently, FKA Twigs' Eusexua has the candy perfume scent of Ray of Light all over it. Ultimately though, what Ray of Light feels like to me is a winning blow in the fight for poptimism. It's an album chock full of experimental influences and ideas, but even at its most out there, it doesn't stray particularly far from the mantle of pop. For the most part, I'd call it a pretty darn accessible album, and yet it ended up being her most critically lauded to date as well, establishing Madonna as an artist who could make pop music that could also reside firmly in the realms of credibility. So we've looked at how Ray of Light used dance music as an aesthetic, but what about when it tries to use dance music as a function? To understand this album, let's talk about progressive house. Progressive house, or prog as it's often been abbreviated to, is not the first and only genre that the prefix progressive has been added to. Prog rock is obviously the most well known, but these days it does come up elsewhere like progressive R&B, and there's prog trance as well, which has a fair amount of overlap with prog house. In the terms of what progressive actually means in the context of prog house though, I've always found it a little fluid. In the same way that prog rock sought to go beyond the basic constraints of normal rock, prog house frequently went for something beyond the normal expectations of house. Although where rock was melodically much more complicated and virtuoso than normal rock, ironically prog house was kind of the opposite in relation to house. It went less for obvious melodies and traditional song structures in favour of longer, more subtly building suites that were based more on tones, harmonies and textures. Hooks were often based around very few notes, sometimes just one. Stabs, as they were often called, because they sounded like you were being attacked in the shower at Bates Motel. But that's the point, the focus was less on how melodic the tracks were and more on just how they sounded and felt. Now, another interpretation of the phrase progressive in house relates to how DJs actually build their sets. Less about spoon-feeding the audience highs constantly and more about, I hate this phrase, taking the audience on a journey. Plenty to see, some refreshing breaks along the way, and a big rush when you get near your destination. That's a good prog house set anyway, a bad one feels more like Desert Bus. So because of this journey building, a lot of prog house tracks in the late 90s and early noughties were very long, like 9 minutes was kind of the standard. Partly this was down to how subtle the elements were in the track and how they needed that space to unfold. But also it was partly because back then the industry standard format for DJing was still vinyl. And because vinyl records couldn't be looped in the same way that modern digital DJing can now do that stuff, the tracks tended to have a lot of intro beats and outro beats to make them more suitable for long gradual transitions that prog house DJs favour. Now, one of the biggest DJs and artists in prog house at the turn of the millennium was Sasha, who contributes the first 2 remixes to Veronica Electronica. And it's no exaggeration to say that in dance music circles he was at one point one of the most respected DJs in the world. His 3-disc album Renaissance the Mix Collection with John Digweed is still considered one of the best and most influential DJ mixers of all time. Mixmag even asked if he was the son of God at one point, which is a fair question. No one likes an industry plant. And in the 90s his own productions were slowly building momentum, and if there's one record that I would consider to be pivotal in Sasha's catalogue, it is his 1999 EP Expander. A 4-track selection of electronica gems that I think genuinely still holds up for its forward-thinking production. Now, the first of his remixes on Veronica Electronica is of Drowned World's Substitute for Love. It's a co-production with Brian Tranzel, aka BT, another focal point of futurist trance in the 90s. I'm not going to give you a deep dive on his oeuvre, that's the wonky angles job. All I will say is that his Garden of Ema dub of Loving You More is, for my money, one of the best trance tracks of the 90s. Just jam-packed with fluid, rug-pulling, innovative production from start to finish. And certainly the first thing I will say about the full-length version of this Substitute for Love remix is that it contains some pristine bits of sound design, particularly in the first few minutes. We've got the familiar William Orbit warble sitting there like ambient space station noise, and you even get this proto-dubstep beat that comes in for a bit. This is actually not that unusual device. There were quite a few progressive house tracks in the 90s that had these half-step sections to them. In DJ sets, it feels like a way of cooling the momentum of a song without taking the beat out completely. So yeah, everything feels quite subtle and meticulous in this song right up until we get past the first verse, and then our main hook ends up being this kind of garbled dog bark. As I say, this was a staple of prog at the time, just wrapping a sonic hit into this scrunched up ball of sound and throwing it at you every half bar. And as far as prog stabs go, this isn't bad. It does ratchet up the intensity a little bit as it goes along, but on the face of it, I can understand why people might think this doesn't seem like the strongest focal point for a song. But the important thing to note about this original 1998 version of this remix is that it was 9.5 minutes long, and the benefit of these elements being at that length is that the monotony kind of puts you into this hypnotic trance effectively, where the less dramatic the elements are, the more the slightest change in them becomes dramatic. So whilst this goblin choke of a stab is a somewhat odd hook to the uninitiated, it's what's happening around the hook that's the big draw here. The breakdowns, the drops, all the little sonic details here form part of the journey-making context for a progressive house DJ. And I mention this because several of these edited versions on Veronica Electronica completely miss that point. The version of the Substitute for Love remix that appears here is 5 minutes and 22 seconds long, and to fit that shortened length they have cut out a sizable portion of the intro, including the half-step bit, and the rest of it has been structured to be more like a contemporary pop EDM remix in nature, and it just doesn't work on that basis. Say what you will about 90s prog house, and I'll be honest, I don't feel like the original is an especially outstanding example, but that 9-minute runtime allows those elements to wash over you so that the lack of an overt hook doesn't matter so much. You cut it down to 5 minutes, it just sounds like they have no idea how to peak, like they got REMIXERS block halfway through. And similar problems are abundant in Sasha's other remix, this time of the big one, Ray of Light. Now, in fairness, I do feel like the full-length version of this remix is the weaker of the two Sasha ones here. It goes up to 11 minutes, and possibly because of the lack of BT here, it feels markedly less confident in the source material. It may also just be because of how iconic the original song is and how off-kilter it is for a pop song. As such, Sasha does go for a more melodic take on this one, using some BP arpeggiators for some underlying beauty. For me though, the big problem with this remix is that the climax just doesn't work for a couple of reasons. Firstly, one problem with prog house in the late 90s and even more in the noughties was vocals. There were exceptions like Deep Dish's fantastic fix-up of Hideaway by DeLacy, but when it came to remixes in particular, so many of the producers just did not know how to handle vocals. I do think structurally part of the problem is that the gradual shift of prog house doesn't really lend itself so well to songs. And in fact, some of the best prog tracks from that time ended up being ones where the vocals were more like chants than they were actual fully fledged songwriting. It meant the producers could just sort of like subtly shift their groove along, you know, whilst the vocals just did their thing. And Ray of Light is not about chance. And whilst I think Sasha just about got away with it on the Substitute for Love remix, Ray of Light is a real vocal tour de force for Madonna, and his fairly incremental production style just doesn't do it justice. Like, there's barely any production shift between the first verse and the first chorus, even though Madonna's vocals shift exponentially. There is one nice device during the breakdown in the middle of this remix, where he teases that Madonna's about to go into the chorus, but then just fades it off into reverb. And then the payoff is more melodic than what you get on the other remix, but even then it sounds like Sasha's desperately trying to keep a lid on it. Oh, and also we have the familiar 90s staple of the time-stretched vocals. I ranted about this device in my Josh Wink video last year, and I do think that Sasha's use of it in this context is particularly uninspired. Just draping this time-stretched chorus over his production like a ungainly fishing net. But again, for all my hang-ups with the full-length version of this remix, it still makes more sense than the Veronica Electronica edit. Rather than making you wait for that breakdown, it goes fairly swiftly from the first chorus into it, but because there's no delay on the gratification, it just feels like very underwhelming gratification. And to be honest, the remaining 3 club remixes on this album all follow similar suit. There's the remix of Nothing Really Matters by the now late Peter Rauhofer, aka Club 69. The story goes that Rauhofer was determined to have Madonna release something that he'd done, so he actually made 5 remixes of this track, expecting her to just choose one of them at most, only for Madonna to like all of them, which is why the tracklist from the single is absolutely awash with Club 69 remixes. In terms of these remixes, you've got the Main Club remix, which I remember being Radio 1's favourite back in the day.
Nothing really matters. Love is all we need.
Which makes sense, it's definitely more melodically immediate than the original. You got the first version I ever heard, which was the Future mix.
Nothing really matters. Love is all we need.
A slightly drony, funky house version that I really like the groove to, although in hindsight it does feel like the vocals aren't entirely in tune with the backing. Although that said, I do love the organ licks that pop up towards the end of the track. Then you've got the funk mix with a PH, not funk, and the future dub, which are both more stripped down versions of the ones I've already mentioned. But for our purposes, the important mix here is the 10.5 minute speed mix, which is easily the most monotonous out of the 5.
Looking at my life, it's very clear to me.
Although out of all of them, it does match the vibe set by the Sasha remixes the most. Once again, it's a melody-free slice of burbling energy and synth stabs that subtly shifts throughout, and unlike the Sasha remix, this largely feels like a transitional stage of a mix. Very little in the way of peaks here outside, parts of it sounding slightly fuller than others. And to be honest, on that basis, the 5-minute edit for Veronica actually doesn't really sap its strength that much for me. It does cut out the ethereal chords at the beginning, which are the only real bits of melody you get from this rendition. But whatever. Feel like pretty much any of the other Club 69 remixes would have been better for honouring Rauhofer's legacy than this one. From all the prog house remixes on this package, the most interesting one for me is the Victor Calderone remix of Sky Fit Heaven. Calderone is another remixer to the stars, having turned his guiding hand to the likes of Depeche Mode, Beyonce, Gloria Estefan, and he did a lot of remixes for Madonna from Ray of Light, as well as for her Austin Powers track Beautiful Stranger. Now, his original remix edit appeared on the single for Substitute for Love as a B-side. It's a scratchy techno rendition that is once again stab heavy, but based around 2 alternating chords rather than just one. Which does give it more of an urgency, plus there's this wonderful carnival percussion on it as well. Like several of the remixes here, I'm not convinced that Madonna's vocals were necessarily tailor-made for this particular aesthetic and vice versa, but the dimension and sound design on this one I think are much more engaging. And at 5:50 in length, you would think it would already not require any further edits for Veronica, but Apparently you'd be wrong, because Warner's T-Boy, or whoever compiled this, cut the track down to 5 minutes 20, and one of the main changes they do is shifting that blank space of percussion from the beginning to the middle of this version. I don't really understand why they did that. It doesn't really add space to the middle of this remix in the way I think they're intending it to. Like, it doesn't feel like a naturally occurring breather. It feels like when you stop mid-conversation because you can feel a sneeze coming, and then it doesn't. The last of the club remixes to speak of here is from both Calderone and Rauhofer, appropriately titled the Collaboration Remix of Skin. The original is 11 minutes long, and it's a hefty rattler of a techno version that I don't think needs to be as lengthy as it is.
I'm not like this all the time.
It's once again a mixture of stabs, some harsher, some warmer, but mostly fairly staccato, and Madonna's perennially soft vocal delivery around this time just doesn't sit that well over it. As such, the two best moments from this remix are the breakdowns, one of which happens around the middle where you get this kind of overcast synth that really suits the chorus.
Do I know you from somewhere?
The other breakdown occurs around the 9-minute mark, which effectively makes it the beginning of the outro.
Touch me, I'm trying.
But it is a really nice, if somewhat overdue, payoff that once again leans into the softness a lot more. And I will say, if there is one single edit for Veronica Electronica that actually improves upon the club remixes, it's this one. Because this cuts down a lot of the vocals over the beats, which were kind of being usurped, and instead it revolves the entire track around the breakdowns, moving the first part of the outro forward to create a second breakdown in the track. It's a little stop-start if I'm being picky about it, but this is a real instance where whoever's been editing these has got a proper ear for the strengths and weaknesses of a track. The remaining two remixes on Veronica Electronica step away from the dance floor with mixed results. You've got the Widescreen remix of Frozen by William Orbit himself, which starts somewhat more spare than the original, going for a kind of Middle Eastern vibe in the percussion and wind instruments. It's a nice idea, but it shifts into the sanctity of the original elements a little too quickly and abruptly for my liking. Plus, you've got this rather cumbersome bass line that's mixed a little too loud and overwhelms the track somewhat. Now, in the original version of the Widescreen mix from 1998, the second half of the track makes up for some of these errors of judgment by properly blissing out in the breakdown and letting the classical harmonies take over. You may notice that this Veronica Electronica edition is titled Widescreen Mix and Drums, even though the remix already has drums. Well, on the original release there was another William Orbit remix of Frozen titled the Drumapella. If you don't know, where an a cappella is basically just the vocals from a track with none of the backing, a drumapella is the same concept but just the drums and none of the rest. They're good little tools for battle DJs to do scratching over, or for producers to try and make their own tracks out of. For some reason, whoever put this Veronica Electronica package together thought it would be a great idea to just shoehorn a big chunk of drumapella into the middle, replacing most of the song's big melodic payoff and ultimately nerfing any swagger this remix had. It completely ruins the momentum, it focuses on the least interesting part of the production, and when the chorus comes back in, it doesn't feel earned. I don't know why they did this. Maybe it was a desperate attempt to try and create something that felt exclusive to this compilation. It just feels like the remixers spent the last minute trying to deal with sound problems. The final remix on this compilation comes from another sadly deceased producer, Fabien Waltman, who had an occasional project with Nelly Hooper called the Dysfunctional Psychedelic Waltons. And this one I find the most interesting by far. It's the one guest remix that actually does something without a 4/4 beat, instead going for this interesting fast but trim breakbeat, with a rumbling bass line reminiscent of Massive Attack's Safe From Harm. Out of everything here, this beat is genuinely genre ambiguous in a way that feels ahead of its time. Like, it's a little bit drum and bass, but it's not really going the whole hog on that style. It's actually more reminiscent of modern experiments in dancehall, of the kinds you might hear from artists like Equinox, or maybe the slightly obtuse drum programming you get from a genre like footwork. But you get all this interesting atmospheric jamming over the top of the rhythm for a long stretch, until eventually it settles into a breakdown out of which emerges the chorus.
There's no greater power than the power of goodbye.
And like the collaboration remix, this is another example where the new edit genuinely does improve upon the original structure, because in the original Fabien remix, the chorus first appeared during the more rhythmic section. And kind of like the chorus on Sasha's Ray of Light, it felt a bit out of place. The Veronica Electronica edit has taken that bit out and saves the chorus purely for the melodic clearing, and it's much better for it. I'm not going to say this remix is a runaway triumph. I do think some of the mixing leaves a lot to be desired on this, but it's probably the closest anything here comes to being an outright worthy revision rather than a truncated museum piece. And then to close off this album, we have a demo track, Gone Gone Gone. Oh, sorry, wrong clip. Here it is.
This love affair is over. Gone, gone, gone.
This was initially uploaded to the internet in 2010, but finally gets an official release here. And it's an important artifact, as it's a demo that Madge made before William Orbit got involved in the Ray of Light sessions, meaning that it's a good way of showing that the album's vision wasn't purely from him, as many might assume. It's another way that Madonna's similar to Bjork, people forget that she actually produces as well. But yeah, you can definitely hear a crudely drawn sketch of the Ray of Light sound in this track. I do get why this wasn't ultimately turned into a fully fleshed out song for Ray of Light, given that it's a gloomy breakup song, but unlike The Power of Goodbye, it doesn't really have much of a unique angle to it. What I do like about this demo though is it actually kind of shows that if Madonna had wanted to be a DIY synth pop artist like your Chicks on Speed or Ladytron, she probably could have pulled it off. There's this rough edge here that I wish more of Madonna's music had, and had she shown more of that in her career than the glossy elan that she largely went for, then maybe her battles with credibility wouldn't have been so hard fought. Anyway, that is Veronica Electronica, and I think it's fair to say... Look, I'm not going to say this was the most disappointing remix collection I've heard this year, because the moment I saw the track list my expectations were pretty low, but considering it's the most high profile remix album of the year, it's definitely the most underwhelming I've done a review for. Ray of Light is for me a genuine art pop classic, a treasure trove of innovative ideas from an artist who until then was rarely regarded as being at home with the clout of experimental music. If a remix collection of that was going to drop in 2025, I feel it deserves some fresh, unexpected takes. And I think Madonna agrees, given that she actually ran a remix competition for Ray of Light this September just gone. The versions on Veronica ultimately provide a snapshot of a specific strand of dance music from the late 90s that's interesting in terms of the subculture it represents, but doesn't really justify itself in terms of why it's been dug up and represented here, especially in the truncated form that it has. As such, my favourite remix is one that most closely resembles experimental artists of the modern day, which would be the Fabien remix of The Power of Goodbye. It's not necessarily the most polished remix here, and it may be a little stilted compared to modern productions of its ilk, but it does genuinely offer pre-echoes of modern day rhythm experiments in a unique and unexpected way. Least favourite remix on this package is the widescreen mix and drums version of Frozen. I really feel like they did William Orbit dirty with this butchering of his original remix, which, whilst not amazing, at least had a pleasing payoff that's been completely robbed here in favour of some weird consolidation of the past. And is this collection of remixes better than the original? Well, there's two answers I can give to that. In terms of whether these edited versions of the remixes are better than the full-length versions from the 90s, then I would say partly, because for all the point-missing butchering of progressive house there is here, there are at least a couple of instances here where I feel the cut-down versions do genuinely work to the remix's advantage. In terms of whether any of these are better than the original Ray of Light tracks though, God no. Almost tempted to say partly due to the Fabien remix, but I think even the weakest track on Ray of Light is better than the strongest one here. But you know, if you haven't listened to Ray of Light and this half-assed exercise in completion inspired you to check out the original, then hey, maybe it was worth it. Madonna's currently working on a sequel to her 2005 album Confessions on a Dance Floor, so maybe this collection also served to whet the appetite for her official return to dance music next year. But as for her Bedtime Stories remix EP that's about to drop, I hope you'll all forgive me if I don't bother covering that one. Anyways, that is my review. What do you think about this album? Do you agree? Disagree? Are there any Madonna remixes you think should have been on here but weren't? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit me up with some suggestions if there are any remix albums you think I ought to review in the near future, and hit that subscribe button if you want to know if I'd take your advice on board or not. There's no greater power than the power of this video is over.
Madonna called, I'm not here. Madonna called, I'm not here.